He was the most decorated United States Marine of his age. 2 Medals of Honor, awarded for 2 separate battles, a distinction almost no one in the country's history has ever held. And when it was over, this same man stood in front of crowds of his own countrymen and told them what he had come to believe, that war was a racket, and that he himself had been, in his own bitter phrase, a gangster for capitalism, a high-class muscle man for the banks and the corporations. His name was Smedley Darlington Butler. He was born in 1881 in Westchester, Pennsylvania, into an old and prominent Quaker family. It is the first of the contradictions that run through his whole life, because the Quakers are a people of peace, and Smedley Butler would spend 33 years making war. His father, Thomas Butler, sat for 3 decades in the United States Congress and chaired the committee that oversaw the Navy. The boy was raised on plain speech and pacifism, sent to a good Quaker school, and expected to become something respectable and quiet. Instead, when the country went to war with Spain in 1898, the 16-year-old ran from the schoolroom to the recruiting office. He was too young, and he knew it. He lied about his age, leaned on his father's name, and came away with a temporary commission as a second lieutenant of Marines, 38 days before his 17th birthday. The war with Spain gave him little more than a fever-ridden posting in Cuba and a taste of the Corps he would never leave. The real education came next. Sent to the Philippines as the United States crushed the island's fight for independence, Butler saw combat for the first time in an assault on a rebel-held fort and discovered, to his own surprise, that under fire he could master his fear and lead men forward. Then, in 1900, came China. A movement the West called the Boxers rose against foreign power, and an international column fought toward the besieged legations in Peking. At the Battle of Tientsin on the 13th of July, the 18-year-old Butler saw another officer shot down in the open. He climbed out of cover to reach him and was himself shot through the thigh. A second Marine came to help and was hit as well. Still, Butler dragged the wounded man to the rear. He was carried to the hospital and promoted there by brevet to captain 2 weeks before his 19th birthday. His men took to calling him Old Gimlet Eye for the hard stare he fixed on anyone who crossed him, and the Fighting Quaker for the impossible distance between his gentle upbringing and his trade. He was small, wiry, foul-mouthed in the field, and fiercely protective of the enlisted man. And he had found before he was 20 the one thing he was unmistakably good at the exact moment the United States was becoming, for the first time, a power that reached far beyond its own shores. For the next 15 years, Smedley Butler was the sharp end of that reach. Historians would group these campaigns under a single wry name, the Banana Wars, the interventions by which the United States sent its Marines into the small republics of the Caribbean and Central America to protect American business, collect American debts, and install friendly governments. Butler was there for much of it. Honduras, Nicaragua, where in 1912 he helped put down a revolt against a government backed by a New York banking house, the Panama Canal Zone. He carried out his orders with skill and nerve, and quietly stored up the observations that, 20 years later, would come pouring out against him. The first of his 2 great decorations came in Mexico. In April 1914, in a quarrel grown out of an insult to American sailors and the fear of a German arms shipment reaching a Mexican strongman, President Wilson ordered the seizure of the port of Veracruz. Butler, by now a major, led his battalion through days of street fighting and sniper fire until the city was taken. For his conduct, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. And here the man's strangeness shows through the soldier. Butler thought the Veracruz Medal undeserved. The action, to his mind, had not risen to the level the honor demanded, and he tried to refuse it. The Navy Department ordered him to accept it and to wear it. He obeyed and privately never made peace with it. The second Medal of Honor came the following year, in Haiti. The United States had occupied the country in 1915, an occupation lasting 19 years, and Marines under Butler moved against Haitian irregulars, the Cacos, holding out in the mountains. In November 1915, he led an assault on an old French bastion, Fort Riviere, driving his men in through a narrow drainage tunnel into the fort itself. The resistance was crushed at close quarters. For that action, Butler received his second Medal of Honor. Then came the First World War and the great disappointment of his career. Butler wanted a combat command in France more than anything. He never got it. His superiors judged him too valuable and too unpredictable for the trenches, and handed him the vast supply camp at Brest, through which the American army poured into and out of Europe. Camp Pontonezen was a sea of mud and disorder, and Butler turned it into the largest and best-run embarkation camp in the world. It earned him a Brigadier General's Star and 2 Distinguished Service Medals, but not the frontline glory he craved, and the ache of that omission stayed with him. By the war's end, he had everything the Corps could give a fighting man. What no one could yet see was that the same loyalty to the ordinary soldier that had made him a hero was about to turn him, slowly, into the sharpest critic his own service had ever produced. He came home to build and command the sprawling new Marine base at Quantico, Virginia, and through the 1920s he served under the Corps' commandant, John Lejeune, the greatest of all leathernecks, who valued his combative protégé's fighting record and gave him room that more cautious superiors never would. The trouble began, as it so often did, when he was handed a job that put him at war with powerful men. In 1924, at the request of the President and the city of Philadelphia, he took leave from the Marines to become the city's Director of Public Safety, its top law enforcement official, in the thick of Prohibition. He threw himself at the work as he had at Fort Riviere, raiding speakeasies by the hundred, going after crooked police and the politicians who protected them. It could not last. The machine he was attacking held the real power, and within 2 years he was pushed out, having learned again that behind the men who broke the law stood respectable men who profited from it. He went back to the Corps, served once more in China in 1927, and in 1929 was promoted to Major General. By seniority and record, he now stood first in line to become Commandant of the Marine Corps, the summit of his profession. He did not get it. He had insulted too many superiors and embarrassed too many important people. The post went to another man. Butler understood his career had reached its ceiling. The final break came over a story about Mussolini. In January 1931, in a speech in Philadelphia, Butler repeated an anecdote he had been told by a well-known journalist, that the Italian dictator, driving at speed, had struck a child in a hit-and-run and had callously driven on. Italy protested furiously. Mussolini denied it. The American Secretary of State apologized, and President Hoover, who had no love for Butler, ordered him arrested and court-martialed, making Butler the first general officer placed under arrest since the Civil War. The court-martial collapsed almost at once. The country found the spectacle absurd, and public opinion swung hard behind him. The charges were dropped for a reprimand. In October 1931, at 50, Smedley Butler retired after 33 years, still the most decorated Marine alive, and finally free to say exactly what he thought. The private doubts of 30 years now became a public crusade. Butler went out onto the lecture circuit, and in speeches that grew angrier and more famous, began to tell audiences the truth as he saw it about the wars he had fought. In 1933, he set down his adventures in a memoir, Old Gimlet Eye. Then, in 1935, he gathered his anger into a short, savage book under a title that has never lost its edge. War is a Racket. His argument was blunt. War was the oldest and most profitable racket of all, conducted for the benefit of the very few and paid for by the very many. Its profits counted in dollars and its losses in lives. And he turned the indictment on himself. In an essay that autumn, he wrote the passage that has followed his name ever since, that he had spent 33 years as a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers, that he had, in short, been a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. He named the campaigns and the interests he now believed they had served, and added that he might have given the gangster Al Capone a few hints, except that Capone had run his racket in 3 city districts, while Butler had run his across 3 continents. This was the man, a national hero turned furious critic of the powerful, who in the summer of 1933 received a visitor with a very strange proposal. And it is here that Butler's story reaches the episode that has made it legend, and that must be told with the greatest care. The visitor was a Wall Street bond salesman named Gerald MacGuire. Over many months, MacGuire's pitch, according to Butler, slowly changed shape from a request that Butler lead a veterans organization to something far darker. Butler testified that MacGuire and the wealthy men behind him wanted him to raise an army of 500,000 former soldiers, march on Washington, and force a frightened President Roosevelt to hand real power to an unelected strongman, while remaining a figurehead. Butler, appalled, played along long enough to learn the details, then took the story to a reporter, who confirmed key parts of it, and finally to the United States Congress. In November 1934, he testified, under oath, before a special committee of the House of Representatives, the McCormack-Dickstein Committee, remembered today as a forerunner of the later Un-American Activities Committee. He named MacGuire and described the meetings, the money, the march. MacGuire, called before the same committee, denied nearly all of it and tangled himself in contradictions. Much of the press howled with laughter. A New York Times editorial dismissed the whole affair as a gigantic hoax. And yet the committee did not laugh. In its final report, in February 1935, it stated that it had received evidence that certain persons had indeed tried to organize a fascist movement, and that these attempts had been discussed and planned and might have been carried out if their financial backers had judged the moment right. It verified much of what Butler had said, but summoned almost none of the powerful men he named, and in the end, no one was ever charged. MacGuire himself died, suddenly, only weeks later. Whatever the full truth of the plot, one fact about it is beyond dispute. The men who dreamed it up had catastrophically misjudged their chosen instrument. They looked at the most decorated Marine in the country and saw a strong man for hire. They had not understood him at all. The same loyalty to the ordinary soldier that had carried him out of a trench at Tientsin was exactly what made him refuse. A year earlier, he had gone in person to the bonus army, the destitute veterans camped in Washington to demand the pay they were owed, and had spent the night among them and praised them as the finest men in the country. He would raise an army, he told MacGuire, only to fight against fascism, never for it. Smedley Butler had a few years left. He kept speaking, kept warning, kept insisting that the young men of the country should never again be sent to die for someone else's profit. In June 1940, as a new and greater war spread across the world, he entered a naval hospital in Philadelphia with an illness of the stomach, reported as cancer, and there, on the 21st, he died. He was 58. Look at the whole arc of him. He won 2 Medals of Honor and tried to give one back. He fought for 33 years across 3 continents and then spent his last years telling his countrymen that most of it had been a racket. A Quaker who became a warrior who became a peace crusader, a hero the powerful thought they could buy and could not. The thread that runs through every part of it is the simplest thing in the world. Smedley Butler was faithful, from first to last, to the men who did the fighting and the dying, and he never, in the end, forgave the men who sent them.